Hello, listeners. Welcome to another special episode of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm the Director of Geopolitical Analysis at Cognitive Investments. If you are listening to this on the Perch Pod channel, a reminder, we are only going to be posting on the Perch Pod channel through the end of August. You need to go sign up for the Cognitive Dissidence podcast if you want access to our podcast after August, and if you want access to all the extra episodes that we're doing. So I'm doing a weekly chat with Rob Larity on geopolitics and markets. We're going to start doing some deep dive, long form narrative podcasts as well, and then these expert conversations that you've become used to. If you're listening to us on Cognitive Dissidence, just one small request from you: please leave a rating or a review of this podcast. It helps us immensely. I really appreciate Dr. Jacek Bartosiak, who is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Strategy&Future, for joining us on a last-minute invite on the podcast. He's the author of a number of best-selling books in Poland about geopolitics. He is, to my mind, really the top geopolitical strategist in Poland. I really appreciate him making time for this. We're publishing this on Monday. We recorded this on Friday afternoon, New Orleans time. It was around 11 o'clock midnight in Warsaw time. Jacek obviously has been very busy in Poland, doing a lot of different things and advising a lot of different actors on the conflict there. So we are incredibly appreciative of him for coming on the podcast and making time. I think we'll also be cross-posting this on the Strategy&Future podcast. So if you happen to be hearing my voice, I appeared on a Strategy&Future podcast about 6 to 8 weeks ago, I think, and I'm happy to return the favor and have Jacek come on our podcast. So without any further ado, Jacek, thank you again for coming on. Listeners, we hope you enjoy this episode. Cheers, stay safe. We will see you out there. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. Jacek, it is late in Warsaw, and I really appreciate you making some time to talk to me. There was nobody else I wanted to talk to about what's going on in the Russia-Ukraine war this week, so we're glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And just to be even more precise, it's a Friday evening, so I feel like we are having a beer or something and discuss those things. It's a very warm evening in June. Junes in Warsaw and Poland are really great, the best moments of an entire year, which sometimes is really demanding, so to speak. So it's, that's the best moment, the best timing to talk to you.
Okay, well, great. Well, look, let's get straight to it. I have not been particularly worried that the Russia-Ukraine war was going to spill out of Russia and Ukraine until this week, and until the news that Lithuania had shut down some of the Russian goods going into Kaliningrad, and that Russia got very, very strident and very, very aggressive and threatening that if Lithuania didn't take down those controls, that they were going to defend their national security interests, whatever the heck that means. So I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what do you think of the Kaliningrad situation? Do you think this is a potential escalatory moment where this goes beyond Ukraine and into NATO? Is Russia picking a rhetorical fight that it knows it can't win? How are you reacting immediately to what's going on with the Kaliningrad situation?
Yeah, before I move into this territory, I like to mention to you and to your audience that I was afraid about spillover effect quite early in the war. There was one moment when President Biden came over to Warsaw. He gave a speech on the main square near the Royal Palace in Warsaw. I was there listening to him, standing like 30 meters from him. And I was a little bit disappointed because he didn't convey the proper strategic signaling that the stakes are equal between the United States and Poland, which seems, of course, natural that they are not equal. But if you have a war next to you with, against nuclear power, and they are sort of not making progress towards Kiev, and you deliver weapons to Poland, you are afraid that they might try to sort of shut off the staging area and also the communication lines leading actually only from Poland into Ukraine, because otherwise other routes are shut off by destroying bridges or any other connectivity hubs by Russians. So that was the moment I was afraid. And that was, sort of even consolidated by the fact that Biden didn't deliver a strong message to the Russians that the stakes are equal, but between the United States and Poland in handling this thing. That was my assessment. But apparently I was wrong, because nothing happened. So I don't know whether I should I should, say my opinion about the current situation, but I'll do my best.
Well, hold on. I just want to say it's not exactly clear that you were wrong yet. I think we still have some time before it appears if you were wrong or not. So
true. Yeah. So this is potentially this thing with the transit through Lithuania is a potentially escalatory thing. First of all, in a broader context, the Russians in the Kaliningrad are running out of the energy resources and maybe other commodities. The situation is very volatile in Kaliningrad. For English speakers, for the global audience, Kaliningrad is an enclave squeezed between Lithuania and Poland on the Baltic coast. And it's like a fortress, but without the strategic depth that threatens Poland and Lithuania at the same time. But if it's not resourced properly, it's a trap for the Russian forces and the actually Russian state. So the Russians' concern is delivering supplies to the Kaliningrad, and the Lithuanians cut it off. There was, as always, this fog of war. Because we are at war, functionally, we are at war here. The intermarium countries are at war with Russia. We deliver heavy weapons in really great numbers to Ukrainians. There is a practical alliance of the intermarium countries to stop Russians. So this might be escalatory. And I don't share your sort of suggested or at least implied optimism. At least this is what I was reading from your words, that, Russia couldn't, go against NATO, couldn't sort of probe NATO. I think that the Russians' game is all about changing their security architecture. And what unfolded in the context of war in Ukraine showed the fracture of NATO. Apparently, Germans don't have the same interests as Poles and even Americans in the context of Ukraine, but that pertains to the broader context. What is Russia for Europe? This is the most important questions of the current times. What is Russia for Europe? For Poles and Lithuanians, Russia should be out of the European system. For Germans, it should be within the European system, because this is a lever of power that Germany is accumulating, in both in terms of the balancing and energy, and also great Eurasian game that I think continental Europeans began to play a little bit, or at least began to flirt with this idea when they were seeing the relative decline of the United States over the last couple of years. And this is all important if you try to answer the question about Kaliningrad. So this might be a good excuse to do some action against Lithuanians, especially, that would not trigger Article 5 at all, because, nobody wants to have a war with Russia. Plus, there were some sort of at least alleged humanitarian reasons to do this action, because those, horrible Lithuanians didn't let them in, didn't let them through. So, you can build up a story that would be a good excuse not to trigger Article 5 and fracture the undermine solidarity under the NATO treaty. And this is a great risk. This is a great risk for Poland and NATO eastern flank countries. If you ask me about what Poles would do and how they should approach the Kaliningrad thing, is I think that increasingly there is a feeling in Warsaw that in case we have war with Russia, the Poles should really field capabilities of fire maneuver into Kaliningrad, also forward positions in Lithuania to offensively flank any movement out of the Kaliningrad from Lithuania into Kaliningrad from the town of Mariupol, perfect tank terrain. And maybe Poles should be forward deployed into Lithuania to threaten this movement. And also that there should be, contingency planning to seize Kaliningrad in case there is a major war, like war at the scale of Russia against Ukraine, to sort of make the Russians, the hostage of the situation in a way that they should think twice whether to do anything against Poland and Lithuania and other, countries on the NATO eastern flank. We can go into operational details, but this is important to understand, and that would change the strategic culture of Poland and strategic restraint of the last 30 years.
Yeah,
that we exercised.
We're 8.5 minutes in, and Jacek, we already need more than one beer for the heaviness of the conversation. Don't. You shouldn't apologize at all. I'm just saying I'm glad it's Friday night, and I'm glad that we're able to kick back a little bit. I wanted to ask you, because there's some things I want to pick at in what you said, but the first thing I want to ask you to define for my listeners, because a lot of the listeners here are not going to know the terrain particularly well. I thought you just might also make this a little bit more real for the listeners by explaining to them a little bit about, you sort of alluded to it with the perfect tank terrain, but tell us about the Suwałki Gap. Tell us why Politico has called this the most dangerous place in the world. Tell us why this particular set of terrain around Kaliningrad is so critical and has the capability to create the kind of existential issues that you're tracing out here.
Yeah, if we are, in agreement with this sort of the opinion that wars break out because of miscalculations and misjudgments, meaning that they are, sort of initiated by strategic blunders. Unfortunately, Suwałki Gap and the terrain around Kaliningrad and what Kaliningrad creates in terms of strategic dilemmas is a perfect example of this horrible sort of development, occurring without any intention. The first reason you mentioned, the Kaliningrad is an island, land island, that, you need to deliver supplies to Kaliningrad. Of course, you can do it via sea, but basically right now, Russians can't control the Baltic Sea, so they are vulnerable. They might think we could sink them. So the Russians are very much concerned. So this already ups the game. The second thing is that because there is civilian population in Kaliningrad and they need resources, if they are cut off resources, so there is a huge room for playing the game, diplomatic game of ambiguity. Who is at fault here that those poor people of the Kaliningrad can get supplies because Lithuanians and Poles are blockading the access. So the Russians may demand the exterritorial route, the exterritorial highway leading to it, access to it. Yeah. And because of this humanitarian aspect, there might be a conviction in the Western European countries that the Russians should be appeased somewhat, okay, and there shouldn't be too much fuss about it. And for sure, there should be any war over that, and that already breaks solidarity under Article 5. And let alone if Russians made any move, like paratroopers or quick action into Kaliningrad through Lithuania or through Suwałki Gap. I'll explain in a minute what exactly this Suwałki Gap means. Mm-hmm. Then, and they may do some fait accompli, showing that they are the masters of the security issues, security architecture in this part of the world, but without triggering Article 5, solidarity. It takes time to have solidarity, political, military assets. It's not so easy to trigger Article 5 against a nuclear power like Russia, especially if, you can always say, that was not a big thing, like, two companies, paratroopers. Let's not make a noise about it. We Germans, and judging how the Germans are behaving towards the issues of Ukraine, I'm telling you, here in the intermarium countries, nobody believes the Germans anymore. And I think the EU will have hard time after the war of substantiating its existence, because for the countries here, the war in Ukraine is of the most vital interest, most vital issue for us.
Can I stop and ask you? I mean, the Germans. One of the reasons the Germans are such weenies is because they don't have a military, and they don't have a military because there would be other problems. Maybe in the intermarium countries if Germany didn't have a military. I wonder, though, is what you're saying, does that also apply to France? Because France is the one with the military, it seems to me here, and is the one that could actually make a difference. Are you really saying that you don't think any of Western Europe would respond if Russia did something like this?
Don't. Here in Central Eastern Europe, we don't believe that France has any substantial capabilities to project substantial power into this part of the world against Russia. Not to mention that they wouldn't have too much of the interest to do so. It's a real war here, and France don't have land army that can face it, especially and sustain it for a long period of time against a great power. I think it's a fake proposition. So incredible. I mean, there is no credibility if you take a look at the capabilities. Yeah. And this is a very sober assessment, and that also adds to the anxiety about the NATO as a sort of a solid alliance in that respect. And all those calls by Macron and Scholz, and all those meetings and all these appeals to have some sort of a truce doesn't add credibility at all, because the intermarium countries want to finish Russians. We want to win this war. Okay, we don't want to have any truce. We want to win. We want the Ukrainians to win. We want to finish the Russian imperial project for good. And we are in this time around. It's not just lip service, because Poles are delivering really big stuff, big ticket to Ukrainians. We keep them going. Actually, we keep them going.
What are your feelings about the prospect for victory? Do you think that's realistic?
And here kicks in the question how we define victory. And whether you mean the military victory, or, as we call in Polish, in the Polish strategic culture, it's not enough to even win militarily. You also need to win the peace, and that's even more difficult in this particular case. And also militarily, it's increasingly more difficult. So there would need to be a few requirements met by the Ukrainians, few conditions occurring, fulfilled, for the for the Ukrainians to be capable of winning. But in terms maybe politically and strategically, the Russians have not already succeeded, but still they can maintain the great power status and influence on the security in Europe, and that was the main objective of the war. And we need to deprive them of this objective, simply, by proving that they are not a great power and they are not a great military, so they cannot influence security architecture in Europe. It's a zero-sum game. It's very easy, and it's very simple. Not easy. It's very simple, but not easy. So that's what it looks like, even if it looks grim. And Germans and French are shocked that the intermarium countries are looking at this through this angles, through these lens. Plus, they dare to deliver weapons to make it happen. This is like a Boston Tea Party multiplied by 10. It's like they are it's beyond their perceptions that those folks here are really running their own strategic agenda, and supported by those crazy Americans coming, from far away across the ocean, trying to sort of stir up things on the continent when everything was great. There was energy cooperation, there was markets, there was stability. The Germans, had all options on the table: cheap energy, open markets, stabilization of Eurasia with Russia, prospect of cooperation from Vladivostok to Lisbon, cheap labor in Central and Eastern Europe with no agenda, run on their own. And slowly but steadily, even though, China deals were still great, that was a perfect life, and access to global markets thanks to the American hegemony. And, and all those pieces are falling apart now, and that's why I said that would pose a serious challenge to the European Union and its structure and the power structure within the European Union. And, because as we said at the beginning, we are just talking as if we were drinking a little bit of the beer on Friday night. So I of course, I permit myself to venture into the lofty propositions or even sort of the assessments, but that gives you the spirit, okay, of how people think here, and it's an honest description, even if they don't disclose it openly too much on conferences. Okay, that's how this looks from the perspective of the intermarium countries. And coming back to the issue of Kaliningrad, it doesn't have strategic depth, so it cannot form the proper staging area in case Russians decide to attack Poland. It might be only the secondary, auxiliary axis of advance. It's very difficult to attack from Kaliningrad into Poland because of the terrain. Mm-hmm. It's if someone watched the Wolf's Lair, the Hitler's bunker in Ostpreußia. Mm-hmm. This is the place. I mean, you need to go towards the Hitler's bunker to get to Poland, so to speak, and this is heavy forested with thousands of lakes and narrow channels of communication. Swampy, boggy terrain. It's very difficult. You need to get to the Vistula river system and move along it. It's a long way to Warsaw, and there are many cities that could be fortified on the way, and there are many ways you can outflank Russia. So it's a difficult proposition for them. But we could use the fire maneuver into Kaliningrad easily from this terrain. So basically, if we field the proper artillery pieces of long range, we keep them hostage. That's as easy as it gets. And if you take a look at Suwałki corridors to the right side of the Kaliningrad itself, and it's a narrow land corridor. Ben Hodges coined the term corridor as opposed to gap because it's more of the corridor. He's right. So there is one railway and two, not even highways, two roads leading to Lithuania. And this is the main strategic line of communication leading up to even Estonia. So this is how the NATO forces would need to deploy and keep logistics to keep the Baltic states fighting. And this is a very narrow, very vulnerable line of communication, flanked from both sides, from Kaliningrad, held by the Russians, and in the east, from the Grodno area, from Belarus, which is, of course, the Russian, proxy minion.
I think we can call Belarus part of Russia at this point, right?
Part of Russia in terms of the power projection capability, in terms of the military dimension. It is true. So you don't even need to flank it with maneuver. You can flank it with a fire maneuver, and or special operation forces, or some, parties that venture into sort of cutting off the communication lines. And this is already a problem, given the narrowness of this corridor. And this has been for the last 7 years, as far as I remember, the main concern of the Polish military, because, and within NATO, we are sort of responsible to keep this corridor open to maintain the existence of the Baltic states in war. But it exposes, if we keep too much of the military along this route, it exposes us not only to those flanking maneuvers and fires from both Belarus and Kaliningrad, but it exposes Warsaw, because Warsaw is sitting directly next to the Belarusian border on the flat, perfect tank terrain. From Warsaw to the Smolensk Gate, there was a perfect tank terrain. And in many wars in the history of Europe, the troops were moving fast. And, they stopped at the strategic barriers that were rivers. So once you cross the Dnieper River and Berezina rivers, then you just land on Warsaw. So it's very swift. Remember Bagration operation in 1944, or Barbarossa even 3 years before. That was the same terrain, but in different directions. So we were afraid since the NATO Warsaw Summit, and it was in 2015, that we would be very much exposed, and that's why the Russians formed the First Guards Army in the Smolensk Gate to have this pinning effect. Like, remember Schwarzkopf left Hook during the Desert Storm? Mm-hmm. So, the Russians started forming this First Guards Army to pin us down in defense of Warsaw and forget about helping keep the Suwałki corridor open. And that created strategic dilemmas for us and operational dilemmas, because we don't have like 3 million strong military, and we have so many divisions. So we had to divide forces and focus our attention on our capital. And that created also the dilemma within NATO: who's going to be responsible for keeping this, line of life open? Because Poles are scared about their capital city, and that put a lot of pressure on Americans, because Poles requested that the American tank corps should only be in Europe, mm-hmm. stationed east of Warsaw and keep Warsaw protected from First Guards Army. And remember those negotiations for Trump thing and stuff, remember all these things? So it was all about solving this operational and strategic dilemma for Poland. Because otherwise we are afraid of losing Warsaw to the attack that Russians devised against Kiev. Shock and awe attack, quick, that was meant to annihilate the political system from close approaches, from across the border, right to the capital, before the world start reacting properly, right? And so this is the meaning of the Kaliningrad enclave. And one more sentence to it. So, at Strategy and Future, we were thinking, we created this new model army operational concept as a proposition to discuss the major reform of the Polish military. And we were sort of thinking that if we put some maneuver brigades, tank brigades, in western Lithuania, close to the town of Mariampol, in a perfect tank terrain, we would be pinning down the Russians, because they would be scared to move out of the Kaliningrad, because otherwise we would physically move in with this tank brigade from Mariampol, at the same time keeping them at bay with our fire maneuver. And that was a strategy in future. It's not an official statement by the government, just for you folks to know. This was the proposition of my team. Mm-hmm. And that would change the game. And I still think this was a very savvy proposition at that time.
Well, it also raises the question, though, so what is going to happen next? Have you seen any evidence that the Russians are gearing up to make an offensive move? Or is what you're saying that you think Poland should go ahead and make a preemptive move so that Russia doesn't even have the option? Where do you think we go from here when it comes to...
Just to clarify, I bet, and I'm sure, I'm confident that Poles will not make any preemptive move at all. Because we are within NATO alliance. We believe in NATO. Maybe sometimes we overly believe in NATO. For sure, that would if we do any such a preemptive action, I think that would unleash hell against Article 5. And also that would undermine this, sort of alliance with the United States that wants to control the escalation process in the NATO Eastern Flank. Plus, I think that Polish military at the moment is not mentally capable of doing it after 30 years of strategic restraint, but we are moving, we're transitioning. I mean, this is major. Sometimes in life, your mentality is transitioning, right? So this is what we're witnessing now in Poland. Big time, by the way. It's a great moment to be a strategist during those times, actually. It's like, undusting old books of the old strategy, of the old state, of the old Commonwealth, our old commanders from the 16th and 17th centuries, reading them again, the same places. This is really remarkable, remarkable after this slumber, after this strategic nap. It's really a remarkable thing. And so we are waking up. We have GDP. We have money to field force. So, and there is a consent among the society that we will field it. So the major debate is what it means to field a modern force and what a modern force means, and that's a major debate between the new school that I represent, that's Strategy and Future, because we believe that the battlefield has evolved, and we need to move along it. And the old school. So I'm in the middle of a major fight here in Poland over which way to go. But that's another topic. So this Kaliningrad thing is this potentially highly escalatory thing and politically very dangerous thing for sustaining the cohesion of NATO. So Poles will not make any preemptive move, but the Russians may exploit. And I even am more not confident, but quite, I'm not afraid too much about an escalation soon. But I think that if the Ukrainians do not win the war, there will be only a Piradeshka, a resting period of time. In Russian, it's called Piradeshka. I think Lenin coined this term, as far as I remember. And after this resting period of time, the Russians will move again. Maybe not, big-scale land warfare as against Ukraine, because it will be against NATO, but so something below the threshold of Article 5. Some raids, some terror even, some strike reconnaissance complex strikes that would still be, veiled. Yeah, that's a word in English. Yeah. Veiled in this sort of the mystery of diplomatic, humanitarian, game disputes, some excuses, some sort of even provocations that crazy Poles did something, so that there will be an ambiguity and nobody would know. It will be a blurred picture, and still the Russians would position themselves and demonstrate themselves as a key actor in the security architecture. So they might initiate the destabilization campaign all along the eastern frontier because they didn't get what they wanted in the ultimatum that Lavrov provided in December 2021. That I want you to acknowledge that we are a great power, and we will be deciding on the key decisions of Central and Eastern Europeans. And NATO infrastructure must move west of the Oder River, and all other things are on the table with us to discuss. So, this war in Ukraine is also the war about the Polish independence. And Lithuanian, and even more, Lithuanians and Estonians and Latvians. It will also decide the future of Belarus. It will also decide the future of Romania and Moldova, maybe Georgia, and it will decide the future of Russia. Major wars in the Intermarium tend to decide the fates of all nations of the Intermarium. Usually it was Poland and Russia that were, waging this war. And who was winning was deciding the fate of the nations of the Intermarium. We won in the 1920. They won during the Second World War. We were winning 15 times. They were winning 4 times. But of course, 4 times they were winning big time and, in the modern times. So that's why we were partitioned. But still, it was not so that they were winning all the time. And this time, it seemed at the beginning that Ukrainians might be winning. And this time, our brethren in Ukraine might be winning. And, Jacob, a miracle happened. once we saw that they defended the Kiev, so all stories of the old Intermarium, old Commonwealth, resurfaced in Poland. Polish president went to Kiev, had a speech in the parliament. President Zelensky, gave his speech after our president, and it sounded like the old state. Just that was somebody. If you live here, you speak Polish, Ukrainian. You live in the neighborhood, you understand each other. It sounded like the old old unity after so many centuries is reappearing, and we really keep them alive in war. So, and there is a consensus in Poland across the nation to keep them alive. And we also took a few million refugees, and they are not in the refugee camps, Jacob. They are in our houses and apartments. You will not find any refugee camps at the border. No humanitarian crisis. They are living in our apartments. I was joking with a friend of mine, with my associate at Strategy&Future. He called me once, a month ago. Jacek, I need to speak quietly, but I think I'm the only one, from all I know, that I didn't take any Ukrainians home. and I said, how I feel, do you think I'm bad? And I said, so I'm the second one, but let's stay quiet, okay? So this is sort of the mood here. And again, pardon me for this, sort of informal mood, but that's a feeling. And I'll give you an example. All Ukrainian citizens were given the full access to all services that Polish citizens have in health, in hospitals, in social benefits. If you have a kid in Poland, you get special benefits. All Ukrainians got it automatically. Okay. A few 100,000 Ukrainian kids went to Polish schools overnight. Okay. I have daughters, so suddenly in their classrooms, the Ukrainian kids appeared. And again, as a sign of sort of the new unity, President Zelensky also announced in the parliament that all Polish citizens are, also allowed to use Ukraine health service and all public services as Ukrainian citizens. So, and even the president of Poland more than a month ago, during a formal speech at the Royal Castle, said that maybe we will see the days when there will be no border between Poland and Ukraine. So who knows what's going to happen after this war in terms of also the military alliance. The security architecture has changed. The security dilemmas have really become very acute here. One more thing, Poland has started a major reform of the military, and apart from the organizational aspect of it, our MOD went on this shopping spree. Okay. So he took a, checkbook. Yeah, that's what we say in English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or a credit card, and is roaming around the world buying everything.
Yeah.
South Korea.
I don't know that like in another generation the word checkbook will mean anything to Gen Z and all these other young kids. But for now, yes, we can call it a checkbook.
Yeah. So South Korea, here we go. Tanks from South Korea, here we go. Tanks from US, here we go. Aircraft from South Korea, here we go. You name it, okay? And because we have money, so we're going to feel the force. The question, of course, is whether this is going to be a well-organized force, against the proper enemy, properly defined enemy in proper terrain and in proper warfare. That's another story. But that requires a strategy culture, and we at Strategy&Future, as I said, we're at the forefront of this major debate in Poland underway.
Can I ask, you said this sort of half jokingly, but I almost want to ask you about it. I mean, you've talked about the Polish people taking Ukrainians into their homes. Why not? I mean, this would sort of defeat the purpose of maintaining Ukrainian sovereignty and independence, but why not welcome Ukraine into Poland in some kind of national union and get Ukraine into NATO through the back door and declare Article 5 that way? I mean, I'm sort of saying that as half of a joke, but I mean, is that something that Poland might consider? I mean, Poland is the country that knows better than anybody else what it's like to be carved up by Russia in a series of wars like this.
Yeah, I know, but this is completely beyond not only imagination, but beyond any possibility. Poland will do nothing to limit sovereignty or infringe on territory of Ukraine. This is in current times, according to our grand strategy. And this is, completely impossible. I mean, it would not happen. So nothing wrong will happen to Ukrainians from Polish hands at all. So
yeah, that's not what I meant. I more meant if you could have some kind of political union in name, could you somehow get Ukraine? I mean, the Europeans, the Germans, and the French are talking about having Ukraine in the EU.
yeah.
It would be better if you had Ukraine in NATO somehow, so that you could go to the NATO countries and say, hey, like, Ukraine is a part of Poland now. Like, these are our people. We're all speaking the same language. I can go use health services in Kiev. We need to go protect these guys right now. I mean, like I say, it's half joking, but is there some way to back them in from that
It's half joking. Of course, it refers to how Germans reunited in this clever way.
Yeah.
That's using the same mechanism, but of course, it's not. We are not that close as Germans from the east and from the west. Ukrainians, of course, are a separate nation speaking a separate language, having not only their own ambitions but having their own pride, and for good reasons. And again, for those of our listeners in the West, they were part of the Soviet Union, and they were quite a modern part of the Soviet Union. Those guys, and they were building rockets, and they went into space, and those guys had nuclear weapons, and those guys had submarines, and those guys had nuclear plants. They were the second most important republic in Soviet Union, and in some dimensions the most important. So those guys have a great location. If they are not at war and they are not being sort of influenced too much by neighbors, they are in a perfect spot on the main north-south axis of Europe, on the main west-east axis in Europe, where Eurasian landmass ends and European peninsula begins. And they are in the best connectivity places through the Black Sea to the world. And they control the soft underbelly of Russia, of the Don and Volga river system, if you control the Azov and the Crimea. So, and of course the Black Sea. So, technically speaking, potentially Ukraine is a powerful, prosperous state with a lot of minerals, the best soil you can have on earth.
Yes.
By the way, for you to know, if the Ukrainians were allowed to do what they wish with their soil and export markets, they would dominate the wheat production across the world. So this is what their soil does. So they have great potentials, and they in the Soviet Union they really had great achievements. So, and I'm particularly conscious to tell this, because as you know, Poles used to be an imperial power in this part of the world. I mean, sort of imperial. We had this land empire, and we not always treated Ukrainians properly, so to speak. So we had also civil wars with Ukraine. And in the East, if you speak Polish, and Polish is a language of nobility, even if you address the peasants. This is how you choose the words. This is how you refer to each other. This is a language of nobility and gentry. And sometimes, the folks in the East, in our Eastern buffer zone, as we say, Eastern frontier, as we say in Polish, they think that we look down upon them. So, we need to be very careful with not patronizing, especially proud nation like Ukrainians that really are potentially powerful.
Yeah.
And that would be a main sin of the Polish grand strategy if we permit ourselves to really embark on this sort of the patronizing mission.
Yeah.
It's a very sorry for saying it three times, but I would really like to admonish against going that path, because the history is being made now, and we need to simply create a new balance of power, a sort of a coalition that would be containing Russia from having influence on the European Peninsula affairs. And it's more like of the coalition, or more of the potential alliance of countries sharing the same perspective and without dominance of anybody at all, and especially my dear Poland. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
critically important to understand. Less of Poland, more of the balancing coalition, more of the sort of groupings of countries that share the same destiny.
Yeah, that was well said. But again, also raises another question for me, and maybe this can be our last question, because I don't want to keep you too long, because we're talking about great nations and people that can participate in this alliance. What about Turkey? Because isn't Turkey just sort of sitting there and sort of the one country that could really put that coalition in business and really hurt Russia where it counts? The Turks seem to be very pragmatic. They have their own reasons to be skittish about upsetting Russia. They import a lot of energy. They import a lot of food. Is Poland in touch with Turkey? Do you feel that Turkey can be a part of the solution? Is Turkey its own thing? How should we think about Turkey from that strategic perspective?
Yeah, that's a perfect question, Jacob. Last year I was in the Turkish embassy in Warsaw and had a meeting with a high official of this embassy. And we talked in English, of course.
Mhm.
And old Commonwealth used to have multiple wars against the Ottoman Empire, okay, over Ukraine, by the way, and the Crimea, approaches to Crimea and Moldova and Bessarabia, all those seemingly faraway countries. And so we were fighting for dominance, in the Danube River system. So, and the Turkish official asked me, what the heck has happened to you guys in your old Commonwealth that you haven't woken up yet, that the world has been changing now, and you need to rise to the not only occasion but to the need, because threats are there and we're gonna have war and chaos soon. So what the heck why haven't you started adopting to it yet? What's wrong with you guys? You used to have a great strategic culture. We were having wars against each other.
Yeah.
We respected you highly. What's wrong with you? So that was this mood. Of course, again, I was downbeat. But maybe now we are transitioning. Turkey is running, in my personal opinion, a very ambitious foreign policy of containing Russia, and even in rolling back Russia across the perimeter of the former Soviet Union. And in this way, the Turks are running the old Polish, strategy of Promethean movement. That's what it's called in Polish, Promethean policy. So our grand strategy was about ripping the Russia off along the stitches of the nations at peripheria of the Russian Empire, and this is what the Turks are doing. So they are executing our old grand strategy now, because they have the ambition, they have capabilities, they have the understanding of this world. And Poles simply believed too long in this strategic slumber, in this end of history, and that the European Union and the United States adopted us economically and militarily, and we don't need to take care about our neighborhood ourselves. And this is why I was being lambasted by my interlocutor in the embassy. And now we are again. I hope we are waking up to this new reality. We will see how we will endure in it. and how we'll handle it. But Turkey, I think, is a perennial enemy of Russia. There is no way this could be the other way around. And but in daily life, they need to play the balancing game. So if you play you fight and negotiate at the same time, according to the old saying of Otto von Bismarck. You talk and you fight. You negotiate. It's like a forceful negotiations, and this is what the Turks are doing daily. Okay, and it's here let go and push, military and other, always interactions. So this is what they've been doing, and I think they've been very successful in that. Take a look at what happened in Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, also Georgia, Azerbaijan. So and not to mention even the Syria and stuff, and the Black Sea, controlled Black Sea by the Turkish Navy, southern Black Sea, and the approaches to the Bosphorus. So this is how I think, and maybe if Ukraine survives and Poland becomes a player, so Turks will turn to us to talk, and this is maximum far my imagination reaches at the moment, because if you try to creep out of under the wardrobe, from darkness, it's so difficult to think about all those angles, all those places at the same, it's a really the moment in the history of this region, epic moment. We will see. And it's all sitting on the shoulders of those Ukrainians that have been fighting for 4 months now, and are exhausted. And we'll see how it will play out.
Are you optimistic?
No, I think I understand that at the moment you are compelling me to give you the answer, and I cannot be ambiguous, right, Jacob?
Well, you can do whatever you want. It's a free country, as we say.
Yeah. Okay, I'll tell you. I think my gut feeling is that we have just entered the new Napoleonic era. The era that started with the French Revolution and ended with the Treaty of Vienna, where there was no set of rules of the road, how you deal with on the European peninsula. And this is happening now across Eurasia. Great powers can't agree on what principles things operate. And this is just the beginning. Trade, blockades, sanctions, strategic flows, other things, commodities, you see what's going on. Leverages, forceful negotiations, killings, terror, war campaigns, as during the Napoleonic era. Major revolution military affairs happening, new ways of using force, new generation warfare, multiple campaigns of different scale, different kinds, different intimidation techniques. I think we are entering the period of major chaos. And it will last until the moment when the new equilibrium will be reached. This is my feeling. And I think this is just the beginning. And the major showdown will be between US and China. Because as it was during the Napoleonic era, all showdown was between England and France, actually. All other things were, the consequences of that. Yeah. So, and the same is between China and US now. And war in Ukraine also is just a symptom of this competition, actually, and the shockwave of the major structural pressure across Eurasia. And Poland is a front state. At the edges of the world, NATO, at the edges of the European Union, at the edges of the world ocean influence, at the edges of the US sea power. We'll see what's going to happen.
All right. Jacek, thank you so much for staying up late with us. I really appreciate it. I hope you'll come back on. We'll probably post this on Strategy and Future too. We'll pick up where we left off next time with the U.S.-China strategic competition. In the meantime, have another beer or some rest or both at the
Yeah.
same time. We should take Otto von Bismarck and say you should drink and sleep at the same time. I don't know.
Cool. Cool. Thanks. And I hope to see you soon. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur.